Seat 12F, the little girl with the toy airplane, identify yourself. Now. The captain's voice filled the shaking cabin. 273 passengers turned to stare. There sat an 11-year-old child in a purple hoodie, looking impossibly small and young. Nobody understood why the pilot was demanding answers from a kid. But in 60 seconds, that little girl would say 2 words that would silence the entire plane, and save every life on board. Before you watch full story, comment below from which country are you watching. Don't forget to subscribe for more amazing stories. The morning sun painted golden streaks across the terminal windows of Denver International Airport as Lily Parker adjusted the straps of her purple backpack and clutched her toy F-15 fighter jet, the one with chipped paint on the wings from 2 years of constant handling, the one that had been everywhere with her since the day they'd folded the flag and handed it to her mother. At 11 years old, she barely cleared the check-in counter when the gate agent processed her unaccompanied minor paperwork with the practiced efficiency of someone who'd seen 1,000 children travel alone. Visiting grandma in Chicago, the agent asked with that particular smile adults reserve for children traveling solo, the smile that said you're brave but also you're still just a kid. Yes, ma'am, Lily replied quietly, her small fingers wrapped around the toy plane like a talisman, like a connection to something precious and lost. The Boeing 767 waited at Gate 24, its massive frame promising routine transportation for 273 passengers on what should have been an unremarkable Tuesday morning flight. The aircraft had flown this route 500 times before without incident. The crew had performed this trip so often they could do it in their sleep. Everything about this morning suggested normalcy, routine, the comfortable predictability of modern aviation. Lily boarded early with the other priority passengers, the elderly, the disabled, the families with small children, and the unaccompanied minors who needed extra attention. Her headphones dangled around her neck, purple hoodie slightly too big for her small frame, making her look even younger than her 11 years. Flight attendants smiled at her with professional warmth, making mental notes about the unaccompanied minor in seat 12F, window seat, economy class, right side, row 12. Lead flight attendant Monica Chen made a special point to check on her. You all set, sweetie? Need anything before we take off? Want me to show you where the bathroom is? I'm okay, thank you, Lily said politely, her voice soft but clear. She'd flown before. Her father had taken her on dozens of flights, though never as a passenger in the back. She'd always been up front with him, in jump seats, in cockpits during ground stops, learning everything he could teach her. She settled into her seat, pressing her face against the cool window to watch the ground crew loading luggage with practiced precision. The toy airplane found its usual place in her lap, her thumb absently rubbing the spot where the paint had worn away from 2 years of nervous handling. To everyone around her, she was just another kid on a plane, maybe a little quiet, maybe a little more observant than most children her age, but nothing remarkable. The businessman in 12E barely glanced at her before opening his laptop and diving into spreadsheets. The elderly woman in 12D, Mrs. Patterson, offered a kind smile before pulling out a thick romance novel with a cover that made Lily look away politely. Nobody knew. Nobody could have known what this quiet girl carried in her mind. 2 years ago, Captain James Stryker Parker had been one of the United States Air Force's most respected F-15 Eagle pilots, a legend in tactical aviation circles who could read an aircraft's behavior like other people read books. They'd called him Stryker because of his precision, his ability to hit targets with impossible accuracy, his reputation for knowing exactly what an aircraft needed before the instruments even registered a problem. On weekends and evenings, when other pilots went home to normal family activities, Stryker had brought his daughter to the base. He'd let her sit in cockpit simulators while he ran scenarios. He'd explained every dial and gauge with infinite patience, never talking down to her, never simplifying beyond what was necessary for her young mind to grasp. He'd shown her emergency procedures, walked her through engine failure protocols, taught her to recognize problems by sound alone. "Listen, Falcon," he'd say, using the call sign he'd given her as a joke when she was 9 years old and had asked what her pilot name would be. "An aircraft talks to you. The engine sounds, the way it vibrates, the pitch changes, it's all communication. Most pilots rely on instruments, and instruments are good, but great pilots learn to listen with their whole body. The aircraft tells you what's wrong before the computer does, if you know how to hear it. He'd made her close her eyes in the simulator and identify engine problems by sound alone. Compressor stalls. Turbine blade damage, fuel flow irregularities. Hydraulic pressure drops. He drilled emergency procedures into her young mind like multiplication tables, making her recite them until they were automatic, until she could perform them in her sleep. "Why do I need to know this, Daddy?" she'd asked once, frustrated after the 20th repetition of an emergency descent procedure. "I'm not going to be a pilot. Not for years and years." He'd knelt down to her level, his hands on her shoulders, his eyes serious. "Knowledge is never wasted, Falcon. And courage isn't about age, it's about being ready when the moment comes. Someday, somewhere, you might see something or know something that matters. And when that moment comes, you need to be ready to speak up, even if you're scared, even if nobody believes you, even if you're the only one who knows. Can you promise me that?" She'd promised. She'd had no idea how much that promise would cost, or what it would mean. The training accident had been quick, they'd told her. A mechanical failure during a routine training exercise over the Nevada desert. The Air Force investigation had called it catastrophic systems failure during high-G maneuver, words that meant everything and nothing, technical language that hid the reality that her father had fought a dying aircraft all the way down, trying to reach an ejection altitude he'd never gotten to. They'd given Lily a folded flag in a triangular case and thanked her for her father's service to his country. They'd given her mother a pension and condolences and a letter from the president. But nobody had given them back the man who'd called his daughter, little co-pilot, and promised to teach her to fly jets someday when she was old enough. Now Lily flew alone, carrying his teachings like precious cargo in her mind, the toy airplane in her hands a constant physical reminder of everything he'd been, everything he'd taught her, everything she'd lost. The flight attendant's voice crackled through the speakers with the standard safety demonstration that nobody ever really watched. Passengers scrolled through phones, read magazines, closed their eyes for a pre-flight nap. But Lily watched every gesture Monica made, noting the oxygen mask deployment, the life vest location, the emergency exit procedures. She didn't need to watch, she knew every detail already, but it made her feel closer to her father, following the rituals of flight that he'd loved so much. The 767's engine spooled up with their characteristic deep rumble, a sound that most passengers barely noticed but that Lily felt in her bones. She closed her eyes and listened, unconsciously analyzing the sound patterns like her father had taught her. Both engines sounded healthy, smooth, balanced, powerful. The General Electric CF6 engines were workhorses, reliable and strong. The vibration frequency was normal. The pitch was correct. Everything was as it should be. The aircraft rolled away from the gate, the tug pushing it back with practiced precision. The captain's voice came through the speakers, "Flight attendants, prepare for departure. Standard procedure, standard language, everything by the book." They taxied to runway 34 right, the big aircraft moving with surprising grace despite its size. Through her window, Lily could see other aircraft in line ahead of them, a Southwest 737, a United regional jet, a FedEx cargo plane. Normal Tuesday morning traffic at a busy hub airport. Then it was their turn. The engine spooled up to takeoff power, that magnificent roar that always made Lily's heart race. The 767 accelerated down the runway, speed building rapidly, 60 knots, 80 knots, 100 knots. She felt the nose wheel lift, then the mains, and they were airborne, climbing into the clear Colorado sky with the easy grace of a machine performing exactly as designed. The Rocky Mountains spread out below them, magnificent and eternal. Lily pressed her face to the window, watching Denver shrink behind them as they climbed through 10,000 feet, 15,000, 20,000. The seatbelt sign dinged off at 35,000 feet as they leveled out for cruise. "Ladies and gentlemen, the captain has turned off the seatbelt sign," Monica announced. "You're free to move about the cabin. We'll be beginning beverage service shortly. For the first 47 minutes, everything was perfect. The plane settled into its cruise at 36,000 feet. Flight attendants began their beverage service, pushing carts down the aisles. The businessman beside Lily ordered coffee and returned to his spreadsheets. Mrs. Patterson dozed peacefully. A child several rows back laughed at something on an iPad. Lily gazed out the window at the cotton ball clouds below, absently spinning the tiny propeller on her toy plane, thinking about her grandmother's house, about the cookies that would be waiting, about whether she'd tell grandma about the new A she'd gotten in math. Then, at 10:47 a.m. Mountain Time, the sound changed. It was subtle at first, so subtle that most passengers wouldn't notice it over the ambient cabin noise, over conversation and entertainment systems and the general white noise of pressurized flight. But Lily's head snapped up like a deer hearing a twig break, her entire body suddenly rigid with attention. Her father's voice echoed in her memory with crystal clarity, "When the sound changes, everything changes. The aircraft is trying to tell you something. Listen, Falcon. Always listen." The irregularity grew louder. A slight rhythmic wobble in the engine note, a womp 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 that made Lily's stomach clench with recognition. She'd heard this exact sound 18 months ago in a simulator recording, her father's hand on her shoulder as he explained the sequence of failure. That's a compressor stall beginning to cascade. One blade fails, creates a pressure wave, causes the next blade to fail. It's rare, but it's deadly. The engine's trying to eat itself from the inside. You've got maybe 60 to 90 seconds before catastrophic failure and possible fire. The womp 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 became louder, more insistent, a mechanical heartbeat that was wrong, dangerously wrong. Lily looked at the businessman beside her, but he was oblivious, tapping on his laptop. She looked at Mrs. Patterson, but the elderly woman was still dozing peacefully. Nobody else heard it. Nobody else understood. The wobble became a vibration. Then the vibration became violent shaking. Then the world exploded into chaos. The aircraft lurched violently to the right, throwing passengers against their seatbelts. Overhead bins rattled ominously. A carry-on bag fell from an improperly secured compartment. Drinks flew from tray tables, spraying coffee and soda across passengers. The scream of alarms pierced through the cabin, not the gentle ding of a seatbelt reminder but the urgent, mechanical shriek of critical systems failing, of an aircraft in genuine distress. Passengers gasped, shrieked, clutched at armrests and each other. A woman across the aisle started that particular kind of crying that comes from pure, unfiltered terror, high-pitched and rhythmic, almost keening. A man several rows ahead shouted for help though there was no help to give. Children started crying, their parents trying to comfort them while barely holding their own fear in check. Lily's hands gripped her toy airplane so hard her knuckles turned white, but despite the fear coursing through her veins, her mind stayed clear and focused. She'd trained for this, in a way. Her father had made her practice staying calm during simulated emergencies, had taught her that panic was the enemy, that clear thinking was the only weapon you had when systems failed. The plane shook like a car on a gravel road, violent tremors that felt wrong in a fundamental way, felt like the aircraft was tearing itself apart from the inside. Through her window, Lily could see Engine 2, the right engine, the one mounted on the right wing, and even at her young age, even through her mounting fear, she could see the problem. Black smoke poured from the engine cowling in thick, oily streams. The massive engine fan wasn't spinning smoothly, it was wobbling, shuddering, and she could see chunks of metal where there should have been none, could see damage that meant the engine was destroying itself. Ladies and gentlemen, please remain calm and return to your seats immediately. Monica's voice tried desperately for professional composure but landed somewhere near barely controlled panic. We're experiencing some mechanical turbulence. Please fasten your seatbelts. It wasn't turbulence. Lily knew it wasn't turbulence. Turbulence didn't come with black smoke and metal-on-metal grinding sounds. Turbulence didn't make an aircraft yaw sideways like it was being pushed by a giant hand. The captain's voice came through the speakers next, tight with stress and barely suppressed fear. flight attendants, take your jump seats immediately. This is not a drill. That's when Lily heard it, the sound her father had warned her about, the sound that meant complete disaster was seconds away. A high-pitched metallic whine, rising in frequency, the sound of compressor blades failing in sequence, each failure causing the next, a cascade effect that would end in complete engine destruction, possible fire, and potential loss of control. She'd heard this exact scenario in recordings her father had played for her. She'd studied the procedures, understood the physics, knew what was coming next. In the cockpit, Captain Mitchell Torres and First Officer Sarah Chen were fighting a battle they were losing. Torres had 18,000 flight hours spread across 30 years of flying. He'd handled engine failures before, had dealt with hydraulic problems, had landed aircraft in crosswinds that would terrify most pilots. But nothing in his extensive training had prepared him for this particular combination of cascading failures. Engine 2 is overtemping. Sarah shouted over the cacophony of alarms that filled the cockpit. I'm getting conflicting readings on thrust, temperature, and vibration. The computer can't stabilize. Pull throttle back on 2. Torres commanded, his hands fighting the controls as the aircraft tried to roll right from the asymmetric thrust. I already did. It's not responding correctly. The throttle's in detent but the engine's not reducing power. The problem, though neither pilot knew it yet, was that the compressor stall had created a pressure wave that was interfering with the digital engine control system. The computer was trying to compensate for what it thought was a power loss, but in reality it needed to reduce power immediately and completely. The pilots were doing exactly what their training manual said to do, following procedures they'd practiced hundreds of times. But their training was for normal failures, standard emergencies, textbook problems. This wasn't textbook. This was a cascading compressor failure during cruise flight, a scenario so rare that most commercial pilots would never encounter it in an entire career. They needed to reduce throttle immediately to idle, not gradually, not partially, but completely and instantly. But their instinct, reinforced by thousands of hours of training, was to maintain some power to keep control of the aircraft. They were making the wrong choice because their training had never covered this specific scenario. And every second they maintained power, the engine tore itself apart a little more, moving closer to catastrophic explosion. In Seat 12F, Lily Parker made the decision that would save 273 lives. Monica stumbled down the aisle, grabbing at seat backs for balance, trying to reach her jump seat near the rear galley. In the chaos and violent shaking, she fumbled for the intercom handset, trying to coordinate with the cockpit. The handset slipped from her shaking fingers and dangled by its coiled cord, swinging wildly. In her panic, she didn't realize that the channel was still open, still broadcasting to the cockpit. Lily unbuckled her seatbelt with trembling fingers and stood up. At 11 years old, barely 4 feet 10 inches tall, she was so small she barely came up to the headrests of the seats around her. The businessman in 12E grabbed her arm hard. Sit down, kid. Jesus, are you crazy? It's not safe to stand up. She pulled away from his grip with surprising strength, her voice carrying over the chaos with unexpected clarity and confidence. Sir, the engine sound isn't normal. That's not a standard failure. Several passengers within earshot turned to stare at her, this tiny girl in a purple hoodie holding a toy airplane, speaking with absolute certainty while adults panicked and cried around her. A teenage boy across the aisle looked at her like she was insane. Mrs. Patterson woke up and reached for Lily. Sweetheart, please sit down. Let the pilots handle this. But Lily stepped into the aisle, her small voice somehow cutting through the pandemonium. The engine sound, sir. Someone needs to tell the pilots. It's not a normal failure pattern. It's compressor stall cascade. The blades are failing in sequence. In the cockpit, Captain Torres froze mid-reach for a switch. Through the open intercom channel, he'd heard that small, clear voice cut through the chaos like a knife through fog. A child's voice. Speaking advanced aviation terminology with perfect pronunciation and apparently complete understanding. Who said that? he demanded into his microphone, his attention splitting between the voice and the crisis at hand. "Who is speaking?" "Flight attendants, who is that?" The cabin went quieter. People stopped screaming to listen, to try to understand what was happening. Monica, still struggling toward her jump seat, had no idea her dropped handset was broadcasting. Other flight attendants looked around in confusion, trying to identify who had spoken and why a passenger was talking about technical aviation failures. Lily's heart hammered so hard she thought it might break through her chest, but she kept her voice steady, channeling every lesson her father had drilled into her. "The engine sound, sir. Captain. It's not a normal failure pattern. It's compressor stall cascade. The blades are failing in sequence. I can hear it from the cabin. The pitch is rising. That means each blade failure is causing the next one. You have maybe 60 seconds before catastrophic failure." Captain Torres and Sarah Chen exchanged shocked, disbelieving glances in the cockpit. Compressor stall cascade. That was advanced aviation terminology. That was military pilot language, specifically Air Force combat training language. That was not something a random passenger should know, let alone be able to diagnose by sound alone from the cabin during a crisis. "Who are you?" Torres's voice boomed through the speakers, no longer addressing his crew but the entire cabin, his voice carrying confusion and desperate hope in equal measure. "Who is speaking? Identify yourself immediately." Every eye in the aircraft turned to seat 12F. Every passenger, every flight attendant, everyone capable of looking turned to see who was speaking with such authority, such knowledge, such impossible certainty. They saw a tiny girl with dark hair pulled back in a ponytail. A child wearing a purple hoodie with a school logo on it. An 11-year-old holding a toy airplane in one small hand while gripping a seat back with the other for balance. She looked impossibly young, impossibly small, impossibly unlikely to be the source of the voice that was speaking to their pilots about cascade failures and compressor stalls. Lily swallowed hard, her throat tight with fear and grief and determination. She thought of her father, of his hand on her shoulder in that simulator, of his voice saying, "Knowledge is never wasted, Falcon. Someday you might need this." She thought of the call sign he'd given her, the name that had been a loving joke but also a promise, that she would fly high, that she would be brave, that she would honor everything he'd taught her. The captain's voice came again, this time with an edge of desperate urgency that sent chills through every passenger. "Identify yourself. State your name and your..." He paused, and in that pause every pilot in the world would have understood the calculation happening in his mind, the impossible question he was about to ask. "State your call sign if you have one." The cabin held its collective breath. Children stopped crying. Adults stopped praying. Even the aircraft seemed to quiet for a moment, the alarms fading to background noise as 273 people processed what they'd just heard. A call sign. The pilot was asking if this person had a military call sign. Lily lifted her chin the way her father had taught her to do when giving reports, when standing before superior officers, when representing herself and her skills with pride and confidence. Her small voice carried clearly through the open intercom, steady and sure and unafraid. "Call sign Falcon, sir." The silence that followed was absolute and profound. Even the aircraft's violent shaking seemed to diminish for a moment, as if the laws of physics themselves had paused to process the impossibility of what had just happened. A call sign. This 11-year-old girl, this child with a toy airplane, had just given a military call sign as casually as if she'd done it 1,000 times before. In the cockpit, Captain Torres felt his blood turn cold and hot simultaneously. He'd spent 10 years flying F-16s for the Air Force before transitioning to commercial aviation 15 years ago. He knew what a call sign meant. He knew the weight it carried, the tradition it represented, the brotherhood and sisterhood it signified. He knew that call signs weren't given lightly, weren't used casually, weren't something that civilians, and especially not children, ever had or used. He also knew that in his entire aviation career, no one had ever invoked a call sign during an emergency unless they knew exactly what they were doing. Sarah Chen stared at her captain with wide, disbelieving eyes. "Captain, she's a child." She said call sign. How does a child have a call sign? What's happening? Torres ignored her, his mind racing through possibilities, through the implications, through the split-second decision that separated good pilots from dead ones. "Falcon," he said carefully, his hands still fighting the bucking, shuddering controls, "how old are you?" The answer came back immediate and calm, 11 years old, sir. "Jesus Christ," Sarah whispered. Torres continued, his voice tight, "Falcon, explain your knowledge. How do you know about compressor cascade? Where did you learn this?" Lily's voice didn't waver, though tears were streaming down her face now, grief and fear and determination mixing together. "My father was Captain James Parker, United States Air Force, F-15 Eagle pilot, call sign Striker. He died 2 years ago in a training accident. Before he died, he taught me everything. He taught me engine sounds, emergency procedures, combat flying techniques. He made me study failures, made me memorize responses. Sir, you have compressor stall cascade in engine 2. The blades are failing in sequence. If you maintain current throttle setting, the engine will explode within 60 seconds. You need to reduce throttle on engine 2 to flight idle immediately, not gradually, but completely and immediately. The pressure wave from the cascade is interfering with your digital engine controls. Your throttle position isn't matching actual engine response. You need to override the system and pull throttle to full idle manually. Right now, sir." Sarah Chen's hands hovered over the throttle controls, her mouth hanging open in shock. "Captain, she's describing exactly what we're seeing on the instruments. The throttle position doesn't match the N1 readings. She's 11 years old and she's reading our engine failure from the cabin by sound alone. How is this possible?" Captain Torres made the split-second decision that defined truly exceptional pilots, the decision that separated those who survived impossible situations from those who didn't. He chose to trust his instincts, to trust the voice, to trust the call sign and everything it represented. "Falcon, I copy your assessment. I'm reducing throttle on engine 2 to flight idle, full manual override. Stand by." He pushed the throttle lever all the way to its lowest position, physically overriding the automated flight control systems that were trying to fight him, that were trying to maintain power based on faulty sensor readings and confused algorithms. The aircraft shuddered violently, yawed hard to the right, and for 3 terrifying seconds everyone on board thought they were going to flip inverted and spiral into an unrecoverable dive. Then, gradually, the violent shaking began to subside. The metallic screaming from engine 2 dropped in pitch and intensity. The wobble that had been tearing the engine apart slowed, stabilized, stopped. The cascade halted. Engine 2 spooled down into a controlled shutdown instead of a catastrophic explosion that would have torn the wing off and killed everyone on board. Sarah Chen stared at her instruments in amazement. It worked. Oh my God, it actually worked. Engine 2 is shutting down clean. No fire. No explosion. Captain, that kid just saved our lives. But Torres wasn't celebrating. His decades of experience told him they weren't out of danger yet. His instruments showed cascading secondary failures, hydraulic pressure dropping in systems 1 and 3, flight control surfaces responding sluggishly, electrical buses flickering as the failed engine took its generators offline. They'd stopped the immediate crisis, but the aircraft was still wounded, still dangerous, still capable of killing them all if handled incorrectly. "Falcon," he said into the intercom, his voice remarkably calm given the circumstances, "we're not out of this yet. Engine 2 is shut down clean, you were right about the cascade. But I'm showing hydraulic failures in systems 1 and 3. Flight control response is severely degraded. I need to start emergency descent to get us to breathable altitude in case we lose pressurization, but the aircraft isn't responding normally to control inputs. The computer is fighting me. What do I do?" In the cabin, Passengers stared at Lily with expressions that ranged from confusion to terror to dawning hope to simple disbelief. The businessmen who told her to sit down now watched her like she might be their only chance at survival. Mrs. Patterson clutched her rosary with shaking hands, whispering prayers. A mother several rows ahead held her toddler tight and stared at this impossible child who was somehow talking their pilots through a crisis. Lily closed her eyes and heard her father's voice as clearly as if he were standing beside her. Multiple system failures after engine shutdown means the pressure wave from the cascade has damaged hydraulic lines running through the wing structure. You'll have asymmetric control response. The aircraft will want to roll into the dead engine because that wing is heavy now, it's just deadweight. Your descent has to be shallow and controlled, using minimal control input. Think of it like flying with a broken wing, Falcon. You can't force it. You have to be gentle, patient, precise. Work with the aircraft, not against it. She opened her eyes and spoke clearly, projecting her voice the way her father had taught her when giving briefings. Sir, don't try a standard descent profile. The hydraulic failures mean your control surfaces aren't responding symmetrically. Your ailerons and spoilers won't deploy evenly. If you try a normal descent angle with standard control inputs, the aircraft will roll right and you'll lose control completely. You won't be able to recover. Then what do I do, Falcon? There was no shame in Torres's voice, no ego, no pride getting in the way. Just a pilot trying to save his aircraft and everyone on it, willing to listen to anyone who had knowledge he didn't. How do I get us down safely? Lily took a deep breath, channeling everything her father had taught her, every lesson, every drill, every midnight conversation about flying when things went wrong. Start your descent at half the normal rate. 2,000 feet per minute maximum, no more. Use left aileron trim, just trim, don't use the yoke yet, to compensate for the right roll tendency from the dead engine. Don't try to fight the roll with control pressure. Let the trim do the work. The aircraft will want to spiral right. That's okay. Let it turn slowly right while you descend. Use the turn as part of the descent profile. Make it a controlled descent spiral. It's a combat maneuver for when everything's broken and you need to get down without tearing the aircraft apart. Sarah Chen looked at her captain with wide eyes. Captain, that's a fighter pilot emergency maneuver. That's what they do in combat when they've lost hydraulics and need to get down with minimal control authority. I've never heard of anyone doing that in a commercial aircraft. We don't even train for it. We're training for it now, Torres said grimly. He'd never performed a controlled descent spiral in a commercial aircraft. It wasn't in any training manual he'd ever studied. It wasn't part of any emergency checklist. But it made perfect, logical sense for their situation. Use the aircraft's natural tendency to roll as part of the solution instead of fighting it. He began the maneuver carefully, his hands light and gentle on the controls, using trim tabs instead of direct control surface movement, letting the aircraft's damaged aerodynamics become part of the descent profile instead of something to overcome. The 767 began a slow, spiraling descent, losing altitude in a controlled right-hand turn that fought against every instinct Torres had developed in 30 years of flying commercial aircraft straight and level. But it was working. The aircraft was descending smoothly, controllably, without the violent rolls and yaws that would have meant loss of control and certain death. Altitude 30,000 feet, Sarah called out, her voice steadier now, professional training reasserting itself. Descent rate 2,000 feet per minute. We're holding together. This is actually working. The cabin remained eerily quiet except for the changed sound of the engines, one running normally, one completely silent. Passengers watched Lily like she was some kind of oracle, some impossible phenomenon they couldn't understand but desperately needed. Some were recording on their phones. Others were crying silently. Many simply stared, trying to comprehend how an 11-year-old girl was somehow coordinating their emergency descent. Falcon, Captain Torres said, his voice carrying both gratitude and continued urgency, we're descending smoothly. But I need to deploy flaps eventually for landing approach. I'm concerned that with our hydraulic failures, the flaps might deploy asymmetrically. If one side deploys faster than the other, we'll roll and crash. What's your assessment? What's your assessment? An airline captain with 18,000 hours was asking an 11-year-old girl for her assessment of landing configuration. The absurdity would have been funny if it wasn't the difference between life and death for 273 people. Lily remembered sitting in her father's home office late at night, unable to sleep after a nightmare about his accident, seeking comfort in his things. She'd found his old training manuals, his notes on emergency procedures, diagrams of hydraulic systems and flight control surfaces. She'd read them like other kids read comic books, absorbing information she'd thought she'd never need. "Sir," she said clearly, "when you've lost hydraulics, the flap deployment motors don't have even pressure. They deploy slower and they deploy unevenly. You can't put them down all at once or you'll get asymmetric configuration. You need to deploy them in stages. 5 degrees, then wait 30 seconds for the system to stabilize. Then 5 more degrees, wait 30 seconds. Watch your roll tendency carefully. If the roll starts to increase, stop the deployment immediately. You might not be able to get full flaps, but partial flaps are better than rolling inverted. If you can get to 15 or 20 degrees, you can land fast with a long rollout." Torres followed her instructions exactly, treating each word like gospel. 5 degrees of flaps. He held his breath, waiting, watching the roll indicator like a hawk. The aircraft shuddered slightly but stayed relatively level. 30 seconds passed. 5 more degrees, another shudder, a slight roll tendency that he corrected with gentle aileron trim. 30 more seconds. He managed to get to 15 degrees of flaps, not ideal for landing, not what the manuals called for, but enough to control their descent speed and give them a fighting chance. "Altitude 20,000 feet, Sarah reported. Flaps 15. We're stable. I've got Denver Center on the radio. They're clearing everything out of our way. We can return to Denver, land on 34 right, that's the longest runway available, 15,000 feet. Fire crews are being positioned." The controlled descent spiral continued, the aircraft slowly turning right while losing altitude, an unconventional ballet of physics and desperation that was somehow keeping them alive. Through the windows, passengers could see the Rocky Mountains below, could see Denver in the distance, could see the patchwork of civilization that seemed impossibly far away. "Altitude 15,000 feet, Sarah called. Denver approach is giving us priority handling. We're 40 miles out." Torres fought the urge to rush, to speed up the descent, to get down faster. Lily's instructions had been clear, slow and controlled. Trust the procedure. Don't fight the aircraft. "Falcon," he said, "I need to straighten out soon for final approach. We can't land in a spiral turn. When I try to level the wings and line up with the runway, this aircraft is going to fight me hard. The dead engine is creating massive asymmetric drag. How do I keep us under control during the alignment?" Lily's mind raced through everything her father had taught her, through every conversation, every lesson, every story about flying wounded aircraft home. She heard his voice clearly: "When an aircraft wants to do something and you want it to do something else, sometimes you have to trick it, Falcon. Use its energy against it. Let it think it's winning while you guide it where you need to go. Flying is about partnership, not domination." "Sir, don't fight the roll tendency," she said with confidence that seemed impossible for someone her age. "When you straighten out for final approach, the aircraft will want to roll right because engine 2 is dead weight with no thrust. Let it roll right just a little bit, keep the wings maybe 5 degrees from level, right wing low. Use that slight bank angle to counteract the asymmetric thrust and drag. It'll feel wrong, everything in your training will say to level the wings completely. But if you fly slightly crooked, you'll have better control. The bank angle will help balance the yaw from the dead engine." "Flying crooked to fly straight," Torres murmured, understanding the counterintuitive physics. "Your dad taught you that?" "Yes, sir. He called it dancing with the aircraft instead of wrestling with it. He said good pilots muscle the aircraft where they want it to go. Great pilots convince the aircraft to want to go there. Captain Torres smiled grimly despite the sweat running down his face, despite the terror of the situation. Stryker Parker had been teaching his daughter philosophy along with procedures, wisdom along with technique. Okay, Falcon. Let's dance. He began to straighten the aircraft from its descent spiral, reducing the bank angle slowly, carefully. As predicted, the aircraft immediately wanted to roll right from the dead engine. Instead of fighting it with opposite aileron, Torres let it roll to 5 degrees right bank and held it there, feeling the aircraft stabilize in that slightly crooked configuration. The yaw tendency from the asymmetric thrust balanced against the turn from the bank angle. It felt wrong, every instinct screamed at him to level the wings, but it worked. They were flying crooked, but they were flying controlled. Altitude 10,000 feet, Sarah called out, her voice carrying surprise and hope. This is working. Captain, we're actually going to make it. Runway 34 right is 12 miles ahead. We're cleared to land, winds calm, fire equipment standing by. The Denver skyline came into view through the windscreen, the airport visible in the distance. Torres could see the runway, that long strip of concrete that represented salvation for everyone on board. But they still had to get there, still had to land a crippled aircraft with degraded controls and asymmetric configuration. Altitude 5,000 feet, Sarah reported. Speed is good. Sync rate is stable. Gear down. Torres hesitated. Lowering the landing gear would create more drag, more asymmetry, more challenges for their already compromised control systems. Falcon, I need to lower the landing gear. That's going to increase drag significantly, especially on the side with the dead engine. Will we be able to maintain control? Lily thought about the hundreds of conversations she'd had with her father about landing procedures, about asymmetric configuration, about flying wounded birds home. Yes, sir. But deploy the gear early, while you still have altitude to correct if something goes wrong. Deploy it now, at 5,000 feet, not at the normal altitude. That gives you time to feel how the aircraft responds and make adjustments. And sir, when the gear comes down, you'll get a strong yaw to the right. Don't overcorrect. Let it yaw about 5 degrees, then hold it there with rudder trim. You're already banking right, the yaw and bank will work together. Gear down, Torres commanded. Sarah moved the lever. They heard and felt the gear doors open, felt the drag increase, felt the aircraft yaw right as Lily had predicted. Torres let it yaw, held it with rudder pressure, trimmed it out. The aircraft settled into a new equilibrium, crooked, asymmetric, unconventional, but stable. 3 green lights, Sarah confirmed. Gear down and locked. Altitude 3,000 feet. Final approach course captured. We're lined up with the runway. In the cabin, passengers could see the ground getting closer, could see the airport ahead, could see fire trucks lining the runway like red and white sentinels. Some prayed. Others cried. Many simply held hands with strangers, united in their terror and hope. Monica finally reached Lily, put a hand on her shoulder. Sweetie, you need to sit down and buckle up for landing. You've done. I don't even know what you've done, but you need to be seated now. Lily nodded, returned to seat 12F, buckled her seatbelt with shaking hands. Mrs. Patterson reached over and held her hand. You saved us, the elderly woman whispered. I don't understand how, but you saved us all. The businessman in 12E looked at her with tears in his eyes. I told you to sit down. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. You're the bravest person I've ever met. Altitude 2,000 feet, Sarah's voice came through the speakers. Runway in sight. 1 mile to touchdown. Speed on target. Sync rate good. Torres's hands were feather light on the controls, feeling every response, working with the aircraft instead of against it, dancing instead of wrestling. The runway grew larger in the windscreen, concrete and markings and salvation. 1,000 feet, runway threshold in 15 seconds. The aircraft crossed the runway numbers, still crooked, still asymmetric, but controlled. Torres began the flare, pulling the nose up gently to arrest their descent. The aircraft responded sluggishly but adequately. 500 feet. 400. 300. The ground rushed up to meet them. Fire trucks raced alongside, keeping pace, ready for disaster. 200 feet. 100. 50. The main landing gear touched concrete with a chirp of rubber on runway, a sound more beautiful than any music. Then the nose gear came down. The aircraft rolled down the runway trailing black smoke from the destroyed engine, fire trucks racing alongside spraying foam as a precaution, but staying upright, staying controlled, staying intact. Torres deployed the thrust reversers on the good engine, applied brakes carefully to avoid asymmetric braking. The aircraft decelerated, slowed, finally came to a complete stop halfway down the 15,000-foot runway. For 5 seconds, nobody moved. Captain Torres and Sarah Chen sat in stunned silence, hands still on controls they no longer needed, processing what had just happened, processing that they were alive, that everyone was alive. Then Torres keyed the cabin intercom with a shaking hand. "Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Denver International Airport. On behalf of the entire crew, I'd like to thank the passenger in seat 12F for her extraordinary assistance during our emergency. We are safely on the ground because of her knowledge, her courage, and her willingness to speak up when it mattered most. Flight attendants, you may begin emergency evacuation procedures." The cabin erupted in sound, cheering, crying, applause, prayers of gratitude. People unbuckled and turned to look at seat 12F, some reaching toward her, wanting to thank her, touch her, understand how this impossible thing had happened. Monica made an announcement asking people to remain calm and prepare for evacuation, but many passengers simply broke down in tears of relief. Emergency slides deployed. Passengers evacuated quickly but without panic, sliding down to safety where paramedics and airport personnel waited. Lily evacuated with everyone else, Mrs. Patterson holding her hand, the businessmen staying close as if to protect her. When she reached the ground, her legs nearly buckled. The adrenaline that had kept her going drained away all at once, leaving her shaking and exhausted. 20 minutes later, after passengers had been moved to the terminal, after emergency crews had secured the aircraft and confirmed no fire risk, Captain Torres and Sarah Chen walked down the empty cabin one final time, checking every seat, ensuring everyone had evacuated safely. Torres stopped at seat 12F. The toy airplane lay on the seat where Lily had left it in the rush to evacuate. He picked it up carefully, this worn F-15 with chipped paint, this talisman that represented everything about today's impossible miracle. "Find her," he said to Sarah. "Find the girl. I need to meet her." They found Lily in the terminal, sitting in a chair that was too big for her, wrapped in a blanket despite the warmth, surrounded by paramedics checking her vital signs while her grandmother, who'd been called immediately, was rushing to the airport. Airport police were keeping reporters at bay. Airline executives were having frantic conversations about what had just happened. FAA investigators were already on scene, preparing to interview everyone involved. When Lily saw Captain Torres approaching, she stood up, the blanket falling from her shoulders. Torres knelt down to her level, this veteran pilot with silver at his temples and crow's feet from squinting at 30 years of skies, kneeling before an 11-year-old girl who had saved his aircraft, his crew, and every soul aboard. "Falcon," he said quietly, and the use of the call sign made several nearby pilots and crew members turn their heads in shock. "What's your real name?" "Lily Parker, sir." Her voice was small now, no longer projecting with authority, just a tired child who'd done something impossible and was now dealing with the aftermath. "Lily Parker." Torres nodded slowly, pieces falling into place. "Stryker's daughter. I heard about the accident 2 years ago. I never met your father personally, but his reputation, everyone in the aviation community knew about Stryker Parker. He was a legend. I'm so sorry for your loss. Fresh tears spilled down Lily's cheeks. The professional composure she'd maintained during the crisis finally cracked. He taught me everything, Captain Torres. He said knowledge was power, but it was also responsibility. He said if I ever knew something that could help people, I had to speak up, even if I was scared, even if nobody would believe me, even if I felt too small or too young. He made me promise. He taught you well, Lily. He taught you perfectly. Torres held out the toy airplane he'd retrieved from her seat. You left this behind. I think you might want it back. Lily took the F-15 with trembling hands, clutched it to her chest. It was his. He gave it to me right before his last flight. He said as long as I had it, he'd always be flying with me. Today, when I heard that sound, when I knew what was wrong, I felt like he was right there with me, telling me what to say. Torres felt his throat tighten with emotion. Lily, I need you to understand something. What you did today wasn't just impressive for an 11-year-old. It was impressive for anyone at any age. Most pilots with 10,000 hours couldn't have diagnosed that compressor cascade by sound alone from the passenger cabin. Most pilots don't know about controlled descent spirals. Most pilots would have frozen or panicked. You stood up when everyone else was failing, including me and my first officer. You trusted your training when the world was literally falling apart around you. He paused, making sure she was looking at him, making sure she understood every word. You didn't just save this flight, Lily. You proved something I believed my whole career but rarely see confirmed in such a dramatic way. Heroes have no age requirement. Knowledge has no age requirement. Courage has no age requirement. You honored your father's memory by being exactly what he taught you to be, brave, knowledgeable, and willing to act when action was needed. Then Captain Mitchell Torres, who'd flown combat missions in the Air Force and had 30 years of airline command experience, did something that shocked everyone watching. He stood at attention and gave Lily a crisp military salute, a full formal salute to a civilian child, the kind of salute reserved for fallen heroes and extraordinary service. Thank you, Falcon. For getting us home. For saving 273 lives, for proving that your father's legacy lives on through you. Lily stood as straight as she could, her small frame trying to match his military bearing, and returned the salute exactly as her father had taught her, hand at the correct angle, fingers together, eyes forward, maintaining it for the proper duration. The toy airplane was pressed against her chest with her other hand. Around them, other pilots who'd gathered to see the aircraft and hear about the emergency stopped and stared. Several of them, those with military backgrounds, recognized the significance of what they were witnessing. A few of them added their own salutes, honoring this impossible child who'd done the impossible. Sarah Chin approached carefully, her eyes red from crying. Lily, I need to tell you something. When you first spoke up, when you started talking about compressor cascades and descent spirals, my first instinct was to dismiss you. You're 11. You're a child. Everything in my training said to ignore you and trust our procedures. But Captain Torres listened. And you were right about everything, everything. You knew things that aren't in our manuals, things they don't teach in airline training, things that only combat pilots learn. If we'd followed our standard procedures, we'd all be dead right now. You saw what we couldn't see. You knew what we didn't know. Thank you for speaking up even though you knew we might not listen. Later, after Lily's grandmother had arrived, crying and holding her granddaughter and unable to comprehend what had happened, after the initial interviews and medical checks, after the chaos had settled into the grinding bureaucracy of investigation and documentation, a man in his 60s approached the family waiting area. He wore a leather jacket despite the heat, and the jacket was covered in patches from various Air Force squadrons. His eyes were red-rimmed but his military bearing was unmistakable. "Excuse me," he said quietly. "Are you Lily Parker?" Lily nodded, exhausted and emotionally drained. The man knelt down, his knees cracking slightly. "My name is Colonel Richard Chen, retired." I flew F-15s with your father for 5 years. I was his wingman. When I heard what happened today, when I heard that call sign Falcon had saved a commercial flight, I had to come. I had to tell you something important. Lily's grandmother put a protective hand on her shoulder, but Lily leaned forward, hungry for any connection to her father. Your father talked about you constantly, Colonel Chen said, his voice thick with emotion. He'd show us pictures of you in the simulator, videos of you identifying engine sounds with your eyes closed. Some of the younger pilots thought he was being ridiculous, teaching a 9-year-old kid advanced combat aviation procedures. They'd joke about it, ask him if he was training you to fly his missions for him. The colonel smiled through his tears. But Stryker would just look at them with that expression he got when he knew something they didn't, and he'd say, knowledge is never wasted on anyone willing to learn it. Age is irrelevant to understanding. Someday, somewhere, she might need this. And if that day comes, she'll be ready. We all thought he was just being a proud dad, being overprotective in some weird way. Colonel Chen reached out and gently touched the toy F-15 in Lily's hands. It's like he knew, Lily. It's like he was preparing you for today specifically. He drilled those procedures into you, made you memorize sounds and responses, taught you things that civilian children never learn, and today, it all mattered. Today, everything he taught you saved 273 lives. But he died, Lily whispered, her voice breaking. He taught me all this and then he left me. He wasn't there today. I was alone. No, sweetheart. The colonel shook his head firmly. He didn't leave you. He's in every procedure you remembered, every sound you recognized, every calm instruction you gave. Today, Captain James Stryker Parker saved 273 lives. He just did it through his daughter, through the legacy he left you, through the knowledge and courage he passed down before he died. He was there today, Lily. He was there in everything you did. The colonel stood and saluted her, and Lily realized through her tears that this was the second formal military salute she'd received in one day, an honor that most people never received in their entire lives. That night, in her grandmother's guest room with the toy F-15 on the nightstand where she could see it, Lily lay in the dark and whispered into the silence, I did it, Dad. Just like you taught me. Just like you said I could. They listened to me. I saved them. I made you proud. And somehow, in the quiet of that room, she felt her father's presence more strongly than she had since the day they'd handed her that folded flag. She felt his pride, his love, his approval. She felt the unbreakable bond between a pilot and his wingman, between a father and his daughter, between the hero who taught and the hero who learned. The next morning, the story was everywhere. News channels showed footage of the emergency landing, played audio recordings of the cockpit communications, interviewed grateful passengers who still couldn't believe they'd survived. But the story that captured the world's imagination wasn't about the technical details of the emergency or the skill of the pilots. It was about Seat 12F. It was about an 11-year-old girl with a purple hoodie and a toy airplane who'd stood up when adults were failing. It was about a child with a military call sign who'd honored her father's memory by saving hundreds of strangers. It was about knowledge defeating chaos, courage defeating fear, and love defeating death. The FAA investigation would take months, but the preliminary findings were clear. Without the intervention from passenger Lily Parker, Flight 1847 would have experienced catastrophic engine explosion at altitude, leading to complete loss of control and unsurvivable crash. The compressor cascade she'd identified and the unconventional procedures she'd recommended were the only reason anyone had survived. Boeing engineers examined the failed engine and confirmed her diagnosis had been perfectly accurate, a rare cascade failure that the flight crew couldn't have identified from their instruments alone. The controlled descent spiral and asymmetric landing configuration she'd recommended were appropriate for the specific failures they'd experienced, even though such procedures weren't in commercial aviation manuals. When asked how an 11-year-old child possessed such knowledge, investigators interviewed dozens of Air Force pilots who'd known Captain James Parker. Every single one told stories of Stryker teaching his daughter, drilling procedures into her young mind, preparing her for scenarios that seemed impossible. One retired colonel told investigators, Stryker used to say his daughter was his legacy. Now we understand what he meant. He wasn't just teaching her about aviation. He was teaching her how to save lives. The airline offered Lily free flights for life. Boeing invited her to visit their facility and meet their engineers. The Air Force requested permission to include her story in their training materials as an example of proper emergency response. The mayor of Denver gave her a key to the city. Passengers from the flight started a scholarship fund in her name for children who wanted to pursue aviation careers. But Lily didn't care about any of that. She cared about one thing: she'd kept her promise to her father. She'd spoken up when it mattered. She'd used the knowledge he'd given her to help people who needed it. She'd proven that his death hadn't been meaningless, that his teachings lived on, that heroes could be any age if they had the courage to act. 3 weeks later, Captain Torres invited Lily and her family to visit the airline's training center. He walked her through a full-motion simulator of the 767, let her sit in the captain's seat, showed her the instruments and controls she'd helped him use during the emergency. "You know what's interesting, Lily?" he said as she sat in the captain's seat, her feet dangling far above the rudder pedals. "We're changing our training because of you. We're adding modules on compressor cascade failures. We're teaching pilots about controlled descent spirals. We're emphasizing the importance of listening to the aircraft's sounds, not just trusting instruments. You're 11 years old and you're changing how we train professional pilots." He paused, then added quietly, "Your father would be incredibly proud of you. Not just because you saved a plane, but because you proved everything he believed about courage, knowledge, and the human spirit. You proved that heroes don't need to be old, or tall, or experienced. They just need to be ready when the moment comes." Lily touched the controls gently, imagining her father's hands on similar controls, imagining him flying with the skill and precision that had made him a legend. "Do you think I'll be a pilot someday, Captain Torres?" "I think you already are a pilot, Lily. You might not have a license yet, but you have something more important: you have the mindset, the knowledge, and the courage. When you're old enough, when you're ready, I hope you'll consider it. The world needs more pilots like you. More importantly, the world needs more people like you, people who speak up when they see danger, who trust their knowledge even when they're scared, who act when action is needed." Months later, the official investigation concluded. The NTSB report praised Lily's actions and recommended several changes to training protocols based on her intervention. But buried in the technical appendices was a note that made Lily cry when she read it. The intervention by passenger L. Parker during this emergency demonstrates that aeronautical knowledge, situational awareness, and appropriate emergency response are not functions of age or certification, but rather of training, preparation, and courage. Her actions honor the legacy of her father, Captain J. Parker, and serve as a reminder that expertise can come from unexpected sources. Aviation safety is improved when all knowledgeable individuals, regardless of age or position, feel empowered to speak up during emergencies. 1 year after the emergency, on the anniversary of her father's death, Lily visited his grave with her mother and grandmother. She placed the toy F-15 on his headstone, the same toy she'd clutched during the emergency, the same toy that had connected her to him during the most terrifying experience of her life. "Hi, Dad," she whispered, kneeling in the grass. "I wanted to tell you something. Captain Torres said the airline is naming an aircraft after you. They're putting your name and call sign on a 767, the same type I helped save. Captain James Stryker Parker, right on the fuselage. They said it's to honor your legacy and your service." She paused, tears streaming down her face. "But I know the truth, Dad. The aircraft isn't the legacy. I am. Everything you taught me, everything you prepared me for, that's your legacy. You saved those people, not me. I was just the tool you'd created, the extension of everything you believed in and taught. I was your hands and your voice that day. I was your courage when mine wanted to fail." She stood up, saluted the grave the way he'd taught her, held it longer than regulation required. Call sign Falcon, reporting mission success, sir. All souls returned safely. Thank you for teaching me. Thank you for believing in me. Thank you for preparing me for the day when I'd need everything you taught me. I promise I'll keep learning, keep training, keep honoring you. And maybe someday, I'll fly jets like you did. And when I do, I'll remember that heroes have no age, they only need knowledge, courage, and someone who believed in them enough to teach them everything. As she turned to leave, a formation of F-15s flew overhead, a missing man formation, the traditional military aerial salute to fallen pilots. Someone at the Air Force base nearby had arranged it, had known she'd be there, had wanted to honor both Stryker and Falcon on this day. Lily watched the jet streak across the sky, watched one aircraft pull up and away from the formation, leaving a gap where her father would have flown. She raised her hand in salute one more time, and in that moment, she understood something profound: her father hadn't left her. He'd never left her. He was in every lesson she remembered, every skill she possessed, every moment of courage she could summon. He was in the sound of jet engines and the feel of altitude change. He was in the confidence to speak up and the wisdom to trust her training. He was in the toy airplane she'd carried and the call sign she'd earned. He was in every life she'd saved and every procedure she'd remembered. Captain James Stryker Parker was gone, but his legacy flew on, in the daughter he'd trained, in the lives she'd saved, in the proof that heroes could be any age, any size, any person who had the courage to act when the moment demanded it. In Seat 12F, an 11-year-old girl had saved 273 lives. But more than that, she'd proven her father's final lesson, that knowledge given in love never dies, that training provided with purpose always matters, and that the greatest legacy any parent can leave is a child prepared to face whatever challenges the world presents. Call sign Falcon. Forever and always. Ready for action.